Okay, so we shall start. Welcome to this session. This is session 2A, Social and Peer Learning. Social and peer learning has been a very interesting aspect of Emoocs, and there has been a lot of research and development in terms of tools. And I'm very excited to be moderating this session. We have 4 very interesting papers, and they study different aspects of social and peer learning in Emoocs. The first paper is by Rémi Bachelet, who wants to chat on Emoocs, lessons from peer recommender system. Rémi is from University of Lille, France, and he will tell us all about their tool.
Where is the microphone? Okay, so hello all, thank you for your attention. So I'll be trying to present you this paper quickly. So this is about a peer recommender system. So what is it? How does it work? That's what we're going to discuss. So first, the paper which were presented at Emoocs by myself and my colleague, a short history. The first paper we presented was on peer grading. Okay, does peer grading work? Comparing instructor and peer assessment. Paper number 2 was about students coming back from one session to another. In 2016, we worked on social interaction, so about the use of discussion forums and how it related to success in the MOOC. And tomorrow we'll be talking about the using of a chat system, well, that's today, and tomorrow we'll be talking about the activity patterns. At what time do learners connect and work? And soon we'll be working on another subject. It's a topic in French. It's about how you work with teachers who use MOOCs with their students. Okay, so let's get on to our present problem, peer recommendation. So you know what peer recommendation is. You use it when you go, for example, on a social or on a dating website. You try to have a match with somebody with whom you want to engage with. Okay, so this is the same question that we are asking here. We are learning in a social context, and we would like to have people help one another. But who do you put in touch with whom? That's where the recommender system enters into action. So, as you know, there is a lot of attrition in MOOCs, so collaboration can be of a great help, hence our research. So, the solution we'll be talking about today is the use of a peer recommender system associated with a chat. So, I'll be showing you how the chat works, and then we'll be talking about recommending contacts, and then trying to extract some statistical results about this. Can a personal recommender system help students in a MOOC? That's what we showed last year at Emoocs. Students who have increased social interaction also have increased performance. Okay? So that's pretty clear. Last year, we put in place a recommendation widget. So it's a small widget which pops at the corner of the screen. So with a chat which was associated. So what we did, the question we have is, we didn't have a lot of students using the widget. So why? We knew that it was very hard to have an answer because, as you know, there is a high dropout rate in MOOC. So if you chat with someone, taken randomly, the person will not respond because there is a high chance that he dropped out of the MOOC. So we decided, instead of chatting with one person, having a chat with a group so that the likelihood of getting an answer increase. Okay, so now the question is, who do you recommend to have the chat with? So there are several algorithms: random, social demographic, and progress. So random is a random match, okay? Socio-demographic is I want to chat with someone I am close to. For example, someone who lives near where I live, someone the same age, someone the same sex. And finally, the third question, the third possibility is to associate people based on the fact that they are at the same stage on the course. Okay, so this is progress. So we decided to show the recommendation strategy and to let the student choose who he wanted to associate with. So we redesigned our system. So you see the system basically is extremely small. It's a pop-up box on the right-hand corner. Okay, and it does attract your attention when a message is received, it blinks. Then the interface you have access to when you open is a simple chat on which you can ask a question and answer. Okay, it's by chronological order. So you see one of the messages, and then you can read the message and contribute. You can, if you like someone, you can choose him as a favorite. Okay, with your mouse, there is a special tab for that. And you can contact again someone you know is now in your friend circle. So how did the recommendation algorithm work? So the students had the ability to choose a random group. So this is the algorithm number 1. Algorithm number 2 is a group who is like me, so lives in the same place, same age, socio-demographical variables. Or lastly, a group which follows the mock at the same stage as I am. Okay. We also created the possibility to have a hashtag with a theme. Okay, like calendar, like let's meet, question, course question. So, does the PRS help students in a MOOC? Questions are who to contact. We try to correlate the use of this recommender with other variables. So, question number 1, how much did students use the personal recommender? What were the differences between students using and not using the recommender? And some students didn't use the recommender at all, so we asked the question, why didn't you use it? So as you see, this is still very much a work in progress, because as we are setting up the interface, we are getting preliminary results. So what about the sample? The personal recommendation system was developed in part 2 of the MOOC. Part 1 is a large common core, and then you've got specialized courses in part 2. It was developed in part 2 simply because of the working time and the beta test we needed to do. So we had only 6,170 students. So you see, we were already in the funnel there. So it was not all the students enrolled who were concerned by our first test. The methodology was using 3 levels of involvement. So level 1 is simply clicking on the recommender system. Number 2 is opening a discussion thread. And the third level of involvement is sending a message. We also correlated the use of the personal recommender system with our research questionnaire, and most notably 7 variables. So I want to be better than others. I am afraid of being judged. I want to share my feelings on a platform. I want to interact in order to learn. This platform is useful for socialization, the real socialization which had been performed, and the fact that I lack contact with others. So we used a multiple person chi-squared test. So result number one is approximately half of the students opened the recommender, 10% opened the thread, and only 3% sent a message. So you see the conversion on this first try was pretty low. So it was really a minority of users compared to use of usual tools like conversation threads on forums. So it was lower than the usual statistics we get. Still, we have a large enough sample. So result number two is to try to correlate using the personal recommender with certain features of answering question. So you see, we can look at the detailed result later, but for example, the will to share feeling was very much correlated, while the goal being better than others was not, but rather only in the end with the likelihood of sending a message. So you see, we have a lot of things that can be analyzed, but right now, of course, you need to be very careful because the sample size decreases quickly. So one of our goals will to redo this test on a larger scale. The result number three is the reason for people not using the personal recommendation system. So we asked the question to 1,600 students, and some said they didn't see it. So as you remember, it was at the bottom left of the screen. Some of them didn't even remember if they had seen it, and others said among 7 possible reasons, the one which were the most frequent was preference for the discussion forum, lack of question to ask, so no result for interaction, and the positive result was that many of them said, I am more ready for interacting in the future. So let's get on now to the final discussion. So 1 over 4 of personal recommendation non-users had no questions. So that was in a majority of way the reason why they didn't use it. And the opposite, those who used it were feeling oriented. So they wanted to share not just learning but also empathy and human contact. So what about the fact that a participant who feared judgment opened thread as much as one who didn't fear judgment? We are wondering if there is a behavior which is, as you know, lurking, and the fact that you have to be active, you cannot lurk on a chat the same way as you do on a discussion thread. So now let's get on to a series of conclusions. So our peer recommender system can help Emoocs students, but is used only by specific type of students. So we do not address the general population. It seems not to fill a gap because the students who choose to use it or the student who didn't said, I prefer the thread, I prefer the chat. So we might be able to address a different population. It seems to be used to compare oneself to others. So this is pretty interesting. You know, on some platforms, to motivate students, you compare them to one another. You say, this other student is ahead of you. Do you want to have a contest with him? This is a powerful motivator. So some platforms could use that, like the ability to have a challenge with another student as a motivation tool. Some limit and perspectives now, because what we are presenting is the start of a study, but we will have many more results soon. So first, we only used our system during the second half of the MOOC. So that was because simply of a constraint about working and developing the program itself. On the session which is taking place now, we have used the recommender from the start of the session. So we will have many more data with an experiment started from day one. We didn't correlate the use of the chat with the final grade. So we will do that in the future. We didn't analyze what people were talking about with one another. We could do that. That would be a bit complicated because you need to do some semantics. If you want to use a personal recommender system, if you want to use our personal recommender, right now, it's really embedded in our platform. So it's not easy to transfer it to your own platform. And then if you want to know more about peer recommendation strategy and their effectiveness, please wait for the next paper in July in which we will present these results. Okay, so the perspective now after this first contact with the system is to get on a larger scale so that we have more results to show you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for a very exciting talk. We have time for questions. I will ask you to speak in the microphone because we need to capture the questions on the feed. We have a question over there.
Which option did learners tend to choose when they were given the option to be sorted randomly by progress and by sociodemography?
So right now, the question was, what were people choosing as a personal recommender strategy? And my answer was, wait, we will publish that in July. Right now, our results are not very conclusive. So we would need to analyze the session which is going now to have bigger numbers to crunch. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I'm from IE Business School here in Madrid. It was kind of building off of that question. When you divided it into those three options, the socio-demographic and the rest, with socio-demographic, was the goal to just kind of see if students would kind of gather together based on location, or were there any other, what was the hope out of that?
It was a mix of age, level of study. I'm not so sure we were able. Country. And then we basically exactly the algorithm, but that they were.
Okay, thank you.
But it could be interesting to test different algorithms.
And so the students, they could choose only one group, is that it, for the whole course? And how many people did you gather in one group?
No, they could choose another kind of group later. Each time they connected, it was possible to click on one system or another. So I guess that if they were not satisfied by one system, they could choose another. But remember, the system was to get to have friends, and then to get in touch with friends directly, which is the ultimate recommender, because you choose someone who you like and then you interact directly with him. So this is a first level recommendation. After that, we want to have something which is more than a social network.
Thank you.
I actually have a couple of questions. I think it's a very interesting tool, and I'm just wondering, because you started implementing it somewhere in the middle of the course, as I understood, for the more advanced, after some attrition. that some people might have already used to the pace of the course and the level of activities might be different if you start from the beginning, having the expectation that there is some social interaction.
Yes, I agree with that. We will be starting, we started at the beginning in this session, so I guess that we will have interesting results about this interrogation.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about it. Any quick last questions? If not, then let's thank the speaker again. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Davinia Hernández Leo from Universitat Pompeu Fabra. From Barcelona, Spain. And she will be presenting about a social learning grid for Emoocs and applying that to explore a future learn case. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, really. So the first author of this work is Kalpani Manatunga, a PhD student at Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. She was articulating this work essentially in a MOOC that we have been running for more than two editions, even though the analysis we will show belongs to one of these two editions we run. It's a MOOC offered by Universitat Pompeu Fabra. The analysis, part of the analysis work and the social learning space grid has been part of the work that she was doing in time she spent at the Open University in the UK together with my samples. So I will be talking again. I think in this session we are all convinced, we all know the importance of social and collaborative learning and the challenges of supporting these types of active learning pedagogies at scale. I will briefly go through these concepts, mention some of the challenges, and then present what we have called the social learning space grid. For then to focus on a specific case, on that MOOC that we are running at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra. So we know that lectures are good for introducing new concepts, for motivating students, but we also know that when students learn more is when they do, when they participate in active learning pedagogies. Part of these pedagogies are those related to social learning or collaborative learning, where they are involved in situations in which they interact with other peers, where they interact with other learners, and in these social interactions, if they are knowledge intensive, then they can lead to good, effective learning. In CACL, which is the research area about how computers can support collaborative learning, we know that free collaborative learning, just forming groups and asking students to collaborate is not sufficient in all the cases in order to achieve fruitful learning. We know that the facilitators need to monitor what is going on within a group, need to regulate these activities, or the activities need to be very well defined, very well structured, so that the expected interactions, expected knowledge intensive interactions that lead to learning happen. So in this context, when you look at the main collaborative learning spaces, social learning spaces that are offered at scale, including MOOCs, are those related to forum discussions in general, despite some nice cases that you may know. But in general, forum discussions are those collaborative learning spaces that are used at scale. When you do a literature review, this is what you see. But even though they have many challenges, we know that if they are not well monitored, if they are not well structured, they cannot be the best approach to reach learning. And also for the facilitator can be overwhelming because they have to monitor many contributions, etc. From the other side, these structures to design collaborative learning activities that we know that work quite well at the small scale. They cannot be easily transferable to large scale. These seminar groups, project-based learning, problem-based learning activities, they cannot be easily scaled. And typically the computer support that has been designed, provided in the literature for those contexts, has not considered these ideas of scalability, how this can be supported at scale. In Emoocs, we have also these particularities about different behaviors of students when taking the Emoocs. What was mentioned by the previous speaker, the sample of the MOOC participants is also decreasing along the MOOC. So we have people joining and leaving the MOOCs along the duration. So this also implies additional difficulties to that difficulty that normally computer support for collaborative learning has been conceived for small scale learning situations. But there are now new approaches, new ideas to support collaborative learning in the context of MOOCs, so social learning in the context of MOOCs. We have seen some this morning and in other presentations. When you look at the platforms, for example, Future Learning is providing, in addition to discussion flows associated to activities, they also provide study groups. In edX, they have the concepts of cohort-specific discussions. Coursera, for example, had meetups, and there are other cases similar to those. And many MOOC designers are also proposing the use of external tools that are external to the platform, such as those coming from social media. So there are many approaches now that are emerging to support social learning at scale. In this piece of work, I can go back and you can take a picture. In this piece of work, we have essentially 2 research objectives. First one is, now there are emerging different approaches aiming at supporting social learning at scale. How can we model these approaches? How can we model these approaches so that designer of MOOCs can consider the different options to support social learning at scale? And can also this model serve as a framework to guide research in the area of social learning in MOOCs, a framework that proposes, that suggests certain research questions that can be answered. So in this, trying to tackle these objectives, we propose a social learning space grid. This is the name of the framework we propose. And then just to demonstrate the ideas of the grid, we use exploratory case study of 3 sufficiently different spaces that we can situate in the grid and that we can exploratorily study to see their challenges, their strengths and their challenges. So this is the framework. This is the social learning space grid. You see 2 different main dimensions. You have the dimension of the size of the group. You can go from small groups to the whole cohort participants. So all participants in the MOOC, only a small group, or intermediate size groups that are what we call groups of increasing size. For example, when you are merging small groups into larger groups. For example, so that they participate in a different space. And then the other dimension has to do with the definition of how they are bound to time constraints, or time design aspects, or to task design aspects. So for example, so the task constraint will be those groups that are formed just to solve a particular task, and time constraint, these groups that are formed for a specific duration along the MOOC. So you can have groups that can be of different sizes but have no particular task, no particular time associated, or small or large groups that may have one task associated or may have a particular duration, the whole MOOC or just a period. These are some examples of the cases that I previously mentioned. Different cases, other cases that you may have in mind, you may try now to situate where they may be situated in this framework. So for example, a general forum would be a forum that is for the whole MOOC participants, the whole cohort, and that lasts along the whole MOOC, so it's not time constrained and it's not task constraints neither, because there is no particular task. It's a generic forum for the whole MOOC. Or you may have a weekly group forum that is just for a particular week of the MOOC. Maybe a weekly, if it's a weekly forum for the whole MOOC, it will be for the whole cohort, and if it's just for a small group, it will be just for a MOOC. The future length study groups are associated, last for the whole MOOC, but there are several tasks that are proposed along the MOOC to be solved in this particular group. And here you can situate different approaches. I will focus on 3 of them in the specific case of a MOOC that is titled 3D Graphics for the Web Developers. You see there that is a 5 weeks MOOC that is run in FutureLearn. You have there the professors at the UPF that are acting as the structures in this MOOC. Is meant for web developers. It's a very technical MOOC, and the aim is to learn how to develop quality interactive 3D applications that run on a web browser. We have run several editions of it. So this is one of the social learning spaces that we included in the 2nd edition of the MOOC. This was in all editions in the MOOC. And this one is the conversational flow, which is the concept that FutureLearn has. This is associated with every step, meaning every video or every activity that is proposed in a week. On a specific topic, and this conversational flow is associated to that particular video, that particular activity, therefore is task constrained, okay? But it can be used in any moment of the MOOC, independently of when the participant is tackling that particular step in the MOOC. So this is how it looks like. It's like have somehow the format of a forum, but you can also filter the activity, the different posts by the people that you follow, or the ratings that they have. This is a conversational flow, and this is how you situate it in the social learning space grid. The other space that has been used in this MOOC is the study groups. The study group was introduced some time ago, but relatively recently in FutureLearn, and it's the concept of having small groups. At the beginning, they started proposing 20, 30, now they are proposing larger small groups, 80 people. If I'm not wrong, yeah, that's correct, fantastic. But these study groups last for the whole duration, unless a participant decided to quit a group and join another group. But in principle, they last for the whole MOOC duration. And then the facilitator, the instructors can propose tasks. So it's somehow, even though it's time unconstrained, it's task constrained because facilitators are proposing tasks along the MOOC in different moments of time. This is how it looks like. The look and feel is quite similar to the discussion flow. And here you see how one of the educators is proposing a particular task. Let's share one of the artifacts created in the MOOC by each of the participants. The third social learning space is, let's say, situated between the other two in terms of the size of the groups participating. So it goes from small to increasing size. So it's considering increasing size of groups. It's a tool that we have developed at our university. It's called, in the context of a research project, it's called Pyramid App. The idea is that the students start in small groups. This is what we call the first level of the pyramid, while it's following the idea of the pyramid collaborative learning flow pattern that structure collaboration in this way. So first level, each participant solve a task, and then they join small groups in second level of the pyramid, and they can be joining in larger groups depending on the design being done by the educators. So, and then the task being done in each level is lasting a specific duration in time. So this is why the pyramid is considered increasing size in that dimension of the grid, and is considered that is bound to tasks and at the same time bound to time constraints. Okay, observations in conversational flows. I will go through each of them, some observations, because it was an exploratory study. So conversational flows were used a lot. It used a lot. The participants were using the concept supported by the platform about filtering by likes, by the people they follow, etc. And we observe how expert learners, so learners that already knew a bit about the topic, were helping novices. They were sharing code. We also observed that late joiners didn't receive that peer support as was happening with the other participants participating more in time. What happens in study groups? We had 16 groups deciding to participate in this study group that lasts the whole duration of the MOOC, and teachers, the educators, were proposing tasks similar to those that you have here in the slide. We observed that the groups sometimes deviated from the main task proposed by the educators. So we also are analyzing the different patterns of participations in these study groups, and here you can see that really out of these 16 study groups, really 12 were active, and the pattern of participation varied a lot, being less, having less participation in the last 2 weeks. What happens with the Pyramid app? You have in the slide also the type of tasks that we were proposing for students using the Pyramid app. We was an external tool to the Future Learn course, so it was more optional to use, so to say. But they were able to propose questions to be answered in depth by the structure, and to share learning artifacts to rate and critique. We saw participants were curious about the questions proposed by the others. The idea there is that if participants were proposing questions individually, they all have the chance to reflect about the questions that they have, and along the pyramid, they may solve questions between each of them, and at the end, only the relevant questions will remain at the end of the pyramid, and those relevant questions were really answered in depth by the instructors. And this was really what happened. So some of them were helping the others answering the questions that they were proposing along the pyramid, and only some questions remain at the level of the pyramid, and those were answered by the educators. But it's true that it was lower participation than with the other approaches. More aspects that we analyze or that we observe in this case. We think that there is an effect of the task design. You've seen that for each type of social learning space, so the space is not enough, you have to propose a task that is to be supported with that space. So it's also not fair to compare the patterns of participation between spaces, because you also have to take into account the different tasks that educators are proposing participants. So for example, the design of prompts for the study group can be improved. We have been improving the design of the prompts in the other editions of the MOOC. The other thing that we observe is that, of course, Pyramid tries to achieve a level of synchronicity in the MOOC. Pyramids are created along once there are sufficient participants to run a pyramid, and then pyramids are created one after the other, depending on the size of the participants. Even though that it is very tricky in the context of MOOC, Pyramid that is kind of achieving that. and facilitating learners interact, those learners that are at a similar paces. But then we also are having this problem that sample size of participants are decreasing along the Emoocs. So there are some challenges when learners decide to drop out. Sometimes we have to regroup along the pyramid activity. So many times we merge groups that are more active with those that are less active, so that at least there are rich interactions in the content of one of those increasingly larger groups. We are thinking also of implementing simulated students. So a large scale, you're expecting to have many students, but sometimes you don't have the students when you need for others to interact with. So we are also thinking on these ideas. Another thing that we think that can be a study in using this framework as a starting point is comparing the different monitoring efforts that are required for the facilitator, depending on the characteristics of the social learning space when situated in the group, in the grid. So the social learning grid, we hope, is a framework that can serve both design purposes when designing the social learning spaces that consider in a Emooc, but also to articulate, to formulate research questions, compare the different opportunities for social learning in Emoocs. We have explored 3 spaces, each of them with challenges and opportunities, and as future work, we plan to do more experimental studies, comparing the different approaches, taking care also of the design of the task, trying to understand which is the monitoring, the orchestration load that requires each of the approaches by the facilitators, and how intelligent solutions, artificial intelligence solutions, can also support these social learning activities, the richness of these social learning activities in the context of Emoocs. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davinia. We have a few minutes, 5 minutes for questions. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. I just have a very short question about the discussions that have a time that are time constricted. So what happens when the time is over? Are they read-only then, or are they completely gone? Or
so in the case of the spaces considered in this MOOC, okay. So time constraint is only the pyramid up. So in this case, the opportunity to participate in a pyramid is always open. But in the pyramid is blocked till a minimum number of students are ready to join that pyramid. It's like when you play games online, that you wait a queue, and when there is a sufficient number of participants, then the game starts. So is this metaphor that is being used? It's also called the bus metaphor by the study groups by Future Learn. When Mike Sharp proposed it, this the bus metaphor in the sense that you wait for the bus, and once the bus, there are sufficient people to have the bus sufficiently crowded, then the bus goes with a level of synchronicity in that particular activity proposed for the pyramid.
Thank you. And do you have any clue on which kind of this conversation better suits which kind of audience? I mean, in terms of age, worldview, education. So, which kind of conversation better suits, but most effective for which kind of students? Do you have any research on that?
You mean the particular space of the pyramid, or in general for the? I mean,
like all this grid with these time restrictions and different kinds of social networking, social conversation in terms of time and groups, small and etc. Which kind of these types better suits which kind of the audience?
I think it's a very good question. I think these are the types of, I don't have a particular answer because we have been only for these particular combinations of spaces covering different aspects in the grid. We are basically doing in the context of this MOOC and in the future probably other MOOC, and we have been also using, for example, the pyramid in different levels of education to support other type of activities. This is true. But in general, these kind of questions are the questions we think can emerge with the framework themselves. When we say that the framework can be useful for researchers, we think that it can be a way of structuring, of articulating research questions of this kind or other kind that can be answered with the different possibilities for social learning spaces that can be situated in the grid, and then comparing which one is better for a particular context, for a particular audience, or which one, also the different activity patterns that can emerge depending on the audience, depending on the type of topic, depending on the design of the task that is proposed to be supported with that space. So I think there are different opportunities for research that can emerge from the structure of this.
So one quick question in the back.
Hi. Have you seen any correlation between this grid in any of the combinations that it may have with actual completion of a MOOC?
No, we haven't done this detailed study yet. So it's been only an exploratory study trying to see the opportunities and the challenges. We have analyzed in more details the level of participation in the study groups. You've seen the patterns then, but we have not looked at the correlations in our case with the completion rates. We know that other people using study groups in the FutureLearn platform are looking at that and are also trying to understand the impact in retention, but not ourselves.
Let's thank the speaker again. And next, we have an interesting paper that actually looks at a promising tool to improve student performance in MOOCs. Improving MOOC student learning through enhanced peer-to-peer tasks. The talk is by Borja Bordel from Universidad Politécnica de Madrid.
So thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. We are seeing in this session the importance of social and peer learning, but sometimes the instruments we have to work with this type of learning are not enough, and we need some enhanced instruments. In this presentation, I'm going to try to propose and explain you how it works. One of these instruments we are using right now in a conceptual proof in a beta platform, MOOC platform. Sorry. Yes. The outline I'm following to this presentation start with an explanation about how is the current situation in MOOC platforms, specifically in peer-to-peer tasks. Later, we are reviewing some previous proposals on improving the learning level of students in social and peer learning. In the third part, we are explaining the particular proposal. And finally, we are explaining the experimental validation we carry out with, as I said, a beta platform. It's not one of these really known platforms like EDX or Myriadax in Spain. So the Technical University of Madrid since 2013 is proposing around like 8 or 10 MOOC courses per year. In total a total of 33 MOOCs. Most of them are or all of them are hosted in the Myriadax platform because it's is our MOOC platform in Spanish. In this 4-year experience, we have noted a change. First students were really focused on obtaining only knowledge. Only was the motivation of having new knowledge. Nowadays, as universities, specifically the Technical University of Madrid, are considering certificates of myriadas as a traditional academic activity, a new group of students only focus on obtaining the certificate have appeared. So, managers at university are worried about how the student learning is evaluated in Emoocs. In order to sign a university-supported certificate, it is necessary to guarantee that competencies have been acquired. Low-level competencies based on the low-level learning of Bloom's taxonomy may be evaluated with traditional quizzes, another common instrument we have in regular Emoocs platforms. However, competencies related to high learning levels in the Bloom's taxonomy, such as, for example, evaluating or creating, are much more complicated to evaluate. Mainly because we have a huge number of students. I don't know, for example, last MOOC I was in, we have like 20,000 is true. The last one was 20,000, so it's impossible to evaluate one student individually to know the degree of learning they have. So, in this presentation, we are proposing a new technology for peer-to-peer tasks that are able to automatically provide the student with feedback in order to inform them about their learning level. Of course, we are validating the usability and performance of the proposed solution. Nowadays, some MOOCs platforms are introducing the concept even of the degree as a collection of MOOCs courses that put together makes a great academic program with uniform formation. The problem of this, at least in Spain, the problem of this program is that we have found really typical behaviors, for example, plagiarism, or even these corrupted PDF files that you can obtain in this typical web pages that you submit a regular file and you obtain a corrupted file. So managers at the university are not really into recognize this type of certificates with all the academic effect that, for example, have in other countries. Moreover, many of the courses in the MOOC platforms are only, let's say, translations of regular courses at college. So most of them are focused on video lessons, quizzes, development exercise. In that, these type of materials, even when they are, of course, adapted to MOOC courses, most of them don't follow the e-learning principles. They are more focused on typical, regular college education. Many works have proved that quizzes do not promote deep learning. It is necessary to work with another type of activities, such as peer-to-peer activities. However, many researchers have investigated the role of students in peer-to-peer tasks, and they have found that, for example, they need to be trained because they don't know how to provide a valuable feedback to partners. Sometimes you can find overall in this kind of degrees that are really supported by college and students in regular subjects know about these courses by professors. You can find like cluster of students working together, making a common strategy about how to obtain the certificate in order to later present it in college. So, what we are proposing? So we are proposing to integrate a new technological tool into MOOC platforms in order to detect this type of behaviors. Here is a really technical figure. First, we have the MOOC platform. In this case, we are thinking in the Myriadax platform because it's the reference platform in Spain, but it could be any other. In this platform, it is integrated a plugin which communicate with a coordination engine, which is in charge of communicate all the different parts, and finally to perform the core of the functionalities of the proposal. This coordination engine receives the product obtained or created by the students, and considering some particular personal information issues, because it's not possible to sort the personal information of students with external instruments, the product it is sent to a formal revision module. This module is a really simple program which tries to detect, for example, empty document, or, for example, corrupted files. Well, very typical texts that are directly taken from Wikipedia or this kind of pages. And if all these filters are correct, are passed, then it is used a revision assistant. We are using a platform that is now is really famous, at least here in Technical University of Madrid, that is called Turnitin. The idea of this, I don't know if all of you know about it. The idea of this platform is you can detect the percentage of tests that is directly taken from a source in the internet. Now is a really useful tool, for example, in the really well-known journals, in order to detect self-plagiarisms. You know, when authors used to take the same text they have and put in another way and present the same text in another journal. In all these figure, a really important role is the role of professors, because they have to define the pedagogical methodology. So, for example, how many times students can submit a product before getting accepted or getting rejected? 1, 2, no defined. Depending on the methodology, probably students are going to behave in a different way. It is a really important factor to take into account. So here we are reviewing in a detailed way with this proposal works. First, as I said, the professors should define the pedagogic methodology. For example, probably in one case you are interested in obtain first information. For example, you only can submit your product once, or twice, or 3 times, depending on the effect you would like to obtain. Moreover, sometimes it is better to open the door and say, it's free. You can submit as much time as you want. And the problem of this approach is, as we are seeing, students, once they know how this works, used to submit the product once, another time, until the system say, okay, it passed. Then, once the methodology is defined, the students submit their product using the regular web interface. Standard. Well, here we have a problem because standard or really famous MOOC platforms don't like to incorporate new instruments or new tools, new beta tools in a simple way. So we are using that. The reason because we are using, that's why we are using a beta platform. Then, once the student have submitted the product is sent to the formal revision module to detect empty files, corrupt files, directly taken text from the internet. And if the results of the formal evaluation are correct, are good, then the coordination engine decide if it is necessary to continue with the evaluation or not. Here is that. If the evaluation process has to continue, then the product it is sent to be deeply analyzed by the revision assistant. In this case, Turnitin. Turnitin have a really well-known interface that is named LTI. So it's open. If you have a license, you can connect it and you can set product and obtain the results. Once the revision assistant have performed the revision, the results are returned to the coordination engine, and it is passed a second filtering phase. That depends also on the methodology and the filters that have to be created by professors. But if the amount of data that is taken from the internet is not above a certain threshold, then the submission is accepted and it is sent to partners to be evaluated, because we have to remind that are peer-to-peer activities. So at the end of this process, the task, it is only a first evaluation that, for example, can be useful to say students, you have taken the text to the internet. Sometimes it's unintentional, it's not, they don't have the idea of copying, but well, that is the result. And if they pass the proof, then the product is sent to partners to be evaluated, to be more the content. Then, in order to evaluate this proposal, we considered two different pedagogical approaches. In the first approach, students could only employ the revision assistant 3 times. Sorry, that is the second. In the second experience, they only could employ the service 3 times. In the first, we considered they could use the service as much as they wanted. We use anecdote reduced MOOC course platform because we tried, but it's complicated to obtain permission of, I don't know, for example, Myriad in this case, to integrate a beta instrument, research proposal into a platform that have to work 24 hours a day. So we construct a course considering only a 5-minute video about the future of higher education, this kind of TED Talks. And later, the student had to perform a peer-to-peer activity. The students were selected among the different people at the Technical University of Madrid. In this case, we create a sample considering 45 participants and dividing them depending on the academic degree. Not age, not gender, because we found that it's the academic degree which most influence the results of these type of studies. Because usually, for example, postgraduate students tend to use tests taken from the internet. Postgraduate students, even when it seems they are more serious, for example, they tend to create clusters and really huge groups of plagiarisms appears. So more or less, the percentage of each group we considered are related with the structure we saw in our last MOOC course. Around 30% of pre-graduate students, 27% postgraduate, and around 20% professor. And management staff, we consider this like a regular, standard academic level, not higher education. With these people, we create 3 equal groups of 15 people. And the first group were asked to work in the peer-to-peer task as in a traditional way. They submit the task, and directly it was evaluated by partners. In the second group, they They have three times to submit the product, and in the final group, they could submit the product as much time as they want. So we compared the results between the use of a limited approach and a free approach with a traditional use of peer-to-peer tasks. Here we have the 4 learning objectives we identified. As can be seen, most improvements are obtained in objectives related with creation. In objectives more related with low-level Bloom's taxonomy, in this case, quizzes are really useful, are really powerful. No difference was found. Moreover, all the products were evaluated by professional professors, but university professors. So they also evaluate the level in which the different learning objectives were reached. Here we have that the first 2 objectives that are related with lower levels in the Bloom taxonomy are more or less reached per equal in all the approaches. However, once more, in objectives related with creation, that is one of the most top objectives, top layers in the Bloom taxonomy, the traditional approach is around 50% lower than the level of learning we reach with the proposed system. It's true that in this case we obtain better results with the free use approach, but as we are seeing now, this is our only fair evidences that it is possible to obtain a significant improvement in the learning level. However, results could be different using when the massive groups are considered. Overall, because different pedagogic methodologies could be employed, not only 3 times or a free use of the platform, and additionally, that's an effect we found really in Myriadas, where people from Spain and from Latin America are together. Sorry, that is necessarily a new line. Depending on the cultural difference may affect highly the results. So we need more robust statistical surveys in order to confirm these evidences. So thank you.
Do we have any questions for the speaker? One here.
Sorry, I came late. Maybe the question is answered by the talk that I missed. This research on learning cognitive gain through the MOOC, is this on a sample that you take? You asked MOOC participants, could you please enroll in a survey, and then you do Survey Monkey or something like this? Or because there's no other way of doing this, and then you have sampling bias and all sorts of problems arise.
Well, no, the research was taken with this sample because no, we selected the people to perform the analysis. We asked people specifically. Yeah, specifically we selected this professor, this student, because firstly we tried with an open code, but the results were not good. So finally,
it's not really representative.
No. We obtained, for example, most of them were postgraduate students. They were interested overall in appearing the research. So at the end, the sample was not. So at the end, we have to ask people individually. So please, if you want, come here.
Is there any magic, maybe to the panel, where you can have representative data and cognitive gain through MOOCs? I think it's the holy grail, isn't it?
along the same lines, along the same lines, I'm curious that if you can look at how peer-to-peer instruction is done in various MOOCs and maybe classify the tasks according to Bloom taxonomy, you're not going to get that depth. I mean, your study is more deep in sort of figuring out how many iterations help in what area, but there is a lot of stuff that's already been done in MOOCs, so maybe you can use that. Any other quick questions to the speaker? If not, let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
And last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Ruiqi Deng from the University of Queensland, Brisbane, Australia, from the business school. And it's a nice way to conclude this session because this is a study that's labeled Understanding Learning and Teaching in MOOCs from the Perspective of Students and Instructors, a review of literature from 2014 to 2016, where they looked at 95 papers and that did research in MOOCs. And one big theme is that there is lots of work that's been done on social and peer learning, and he's going to tell us more.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Ruiqi. I'm studying PhD at the UK Business School at the University of Queensland in Australia. And my research topic and this presentation is about learning and teaching dynamics in the context of massive open online courses. As my conference paper was accepted as a shorter paper, so I will just skip the literature review part and jump to the research question. So the key research question is about what do recently reported research findings suggest about learning and teaching in the context of massive open online courses? Well, learning and teaching is a very broad concept, so we need to narrow it down. That's why we adopted big 3P model of learning and teaching to organize our research. This framework was adopted because it is heuristically useful. It divides learning and teaching process into three related but distinct stages: pre-search, process, and product. Before learning takes place, during the learning process, and after learning is completed, after MOOC is completed. Well, the model suggests that student factors such as social demographics of students, their psychographics, their motivations, their skills, their previous experience with MOOCs work together with teaching contexts which set the scene. And they work together to produce a particular learning and teaching mix which will likely to affect the learning-focused activities. And of course, learning-focused activities are likely to affect the learning outcomes. This relationship has been validated in general educational research. You can see the bold arrows indicate the main flow of information. Well, article search strategies. We paired to search for the literature. We paired the keywords massive open online courses, or its acronym MOOCs, and the names of the major leading MOOC platforms such as Coursera and edX, with keywords identified in big 3P model at different stages: pre-search, process, and product. And there are several selection criteria. The knowledge base should be related to learning and teaching in the context of massive open online courses. They must be empirical research. They can be dissertations, the thesis, peer-reviewed journals, conference proceedings and the papers, and also book chapters, but they cannot be conceptual or theoretical papers. And they must be conducted from the perspective of students and instructors who have experience of using MOOCs. They cannot be conducted from perspective such as policymakers or school administrators or individuals who are interested in MOOCs but have no experience of using MOOCs. the time frame was imposed from, the time frame is from 2014 to 2016 because more recent empirical studies have relatively larger sample sizes compared to research, compared to empirical research which were conducted before 2014. So finally we got 95 empirical papers, publications. Well, some research findings, student factors, we found the majority of MOOC participants, they are already well-educated members of society. They usually have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And they're more likely to come from Western developed countries, such as the US, European countries, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. And they're more likely to be 45 years old and younger, and it is quite consistent throughout different platforms, Coursera, edX, and FutureLearn. But the studies of gender are more inconclusive. But it's sort of consistent with what happened in brick-and-mortar universities in the real world. Some arts and humanities courses have more female participants, while some technology and engineering courses have more male students. Students' factors show there are a variety of intrinsic, extrinsic, and social motivations. Intrinsic motivations, like they're genuinely interested in the course, they want to learn more, they seek fun and enjoyment in this course. Extrinsic motivations include, well, finding more resources. They're looking for resources related to their current or future study field, or knowledge related to their future or current career. And also social motivations, such as making friends with others or seeking professional network through discussion forums, primarily through discussion forums. Well, learning and teaching is not only explored from the perspective of students, but also instructors. Particularly, we found that instructors' motivations, challenges, and pedagogical preferences have been well explored in the MOOC context. However, few studies have explored the impact of teaching contests on students' learning activities and learning outcomes. So we suggest that an important future research area is to understand the influence. Well, when we talk about influence, it's more quantitative impact or effect. So we suggest that future research should focus on the statistical analysis of the impact of teaching contests on student learning activities and their learning outcomes. Well, student learning activities have been explored from a variety of perspectives. And we group them into 4 different types of engagement. Behavioral engagement is more about students' participation in academic activities. They are more observable, such as their progression behavior, their usage patterns of videos or other course-related materials. But cognitive engagement is less observed in the MOOC literature, while cognitive engagement is about students' mental efforts to understand difficult skills or difficult knowledge or master difficult skills. The only research paper seems to be conducted by Littlejohn, and it's about self-regulation in the MOOC context. Well, emotional engagement is self-explanatory. It's about emotional connections students are making with course content, with their peers, or with instructors. And both negative and positive engagement, emotional engagement, have been explored in the MOOC context, particularly through students' use of online discussion forums. While social engagement is about students' social interaction with their peers, with instructors, with the forum moderators, and both online and offline social engagement have been explored in the MOOC context. About learning outcomes also have been explored from a variety variety of perspectives, include but not limited to perceptions, their retention, completion, or their academic performance. And in particular, we found that there is a strong relationship between students' social and behavioral engagement and students' retention and academic performance, which means students who contribute more via social tools and participate in more activities in Emoocs tend to stay in a MOOC, tend to stay and finish a MOOC, and receive a higher final score in this MOOC. Well, several conclusions and future opportunities. While the mainstream consumers of MOOC are usually below 45 years old, they are already well-educated members of society, and they're more likely to come from Western developed countries. This is self-explanatory because there has been explored from a variety of empirical studies in the past. However, we would like to highlight that the majority of conclusions about findings and conclusions about MOOC students' participation, their engagement, and their learning outcomes are based on those individuals who are already educated, and they are already from a well-educated background. They come from Western developed countries. So we suggest that future research should shed light on non-mainstream consumers of MOOC participants, their challenges to accessing and studying MOOCs. Well, and also we found that MOOC participants displayed a variety of intrinsic, extrinsic, and social motivations, but MOOC researchers tend to not distinguish different types of motivations. It is important that we associate different types of motivations with students' learning outcomes, because not all of MOOC participants aimed to finish the course or get a higher score at the end. So we should not focus all our research on the efforts to improving students' retention or to help them to receive a better score in the course. And also it is important that we monitor the change of motivations. Well, motivation is usually studied as a static trait at the beginning of the MOOC, but it is critical that we recognize that motivation can be changed during the learning process. How it will change during the learning process, how the change will have impact on student engagement and their learning outcomes, and how teaching contexts will influence such change should be explored in the future research. Well, the third point is that student engagement has been studied from a variety of perspectives in the MOOC context, cognitive, behavior, social, and emotional. However, there is no instrument to measure the pattern and the level of student engagement in MOOCs. So the next work I will do is to develop an instrument to measure the patterns, to quantitatively measure the patterns of student engagement in MOOCs. And the fourth point is research shows a strong relationship between behavior and social engagement and their learning outcomes, particularly in terms of student retention and their academic performance. However, we're not sure about the relationship between student learning outcomes and cognitive and emotional engagement. And we're not sure about if offline social engagement will have a huge impact on student learning outcomes. So future research might want to shed light on this area. That is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions to the speaker?
Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. What type of libraries have you searched for all these articles?
Well, I've searched 5 databases.
What is it?
I searched 5 databases.
Okay,
Web
5
of Science,
databases.
Google Scholar,
Yeah.
yeah.
And my second question is, I looked at what themes I think you generalized, like retention and engagement and the others. Through all these 95 articles, what was the highest or the most popular theme of the learning themes that you found? For example, was it more? Was there more papers talking about retention and dropout, or more about engagement? I'm asking this question because I did a similar study, and I found that many papers talk about engagement, not really the dropout or the completion. So my question for you: did you find the same for that, or what do you think?
Well, as I would say, the majority of studies focus on student learning outcomes, engagement, but less study focus on student factors in teaching contexts. And for student engagement, behavioral engagement and social engagement are heavily researched, but not emotional or cognitive engagement. For learning outcomes, we found that student academic performance is very heavily researched, and a lot of researchers, a lot of MOOC researchers use students' academic performance as a sole proxy for their learning outcome. But we suggest that we use different indicators for learning outcomes.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Time for one last question over here.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting review, and we really need these reviews now in that state of the art. But my question is related to the MOOC platforms in which you have done your research. I mean, literature shows significant difference between American platforms and European platforms. I mean, in the profiles of the participants. This is my question. Thank you.
Well, I didn't find a huge difference between users on different platforms. They're pretty consistent in terms of student factors.
So you didn't distinguish between American and European platforms in your literature?
Well, I look at research about FutureLearn and Coursera and edX, Khan Academy, these major platforms, but the findings is very consistent. For example, I found on several major MOOC platforms, the MOOC participants are usually 45 years old and younger.
Thank you very much.
It's pretty consistent.
Thank you all for attending this session. Please join me to thank all our speakers. And please feel free to approach any of them if you have any more questions during the breaks.